Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sarah Beck, here to present the Award for Program Excellence. We are very pleased to recognize two outstanding programs this year. For 17 years, our first awardee's Urban Agriculture Division has become deeply embedded in its city's food system, growing from a single farm site to its current 16. They have built a series of programs that uplift communities by increasing food access and annually training 130 teens, 35 justice-involved individuals, 20 farm apprentices, and 110 participants in continuing education. The farms are located in communities with high rates of food insecurity and provide food to residents through reduced price sales, donations, and affordable community markets, increasing the availability of locally grown food. The American Public Gardens Association is pleased to present this year's first Award of Program Excellence to the Chicago Botanic Gardens Windy City Harvest Program. This year's second awardee is a program launched in 2013 as a means of making membership to this free admission garden more meaningful and valuable. Through an annual Children's Garden Festival, thousands of families experience the wonder and excitement of reading in a unique and immersive festival that promotes children's interest in plants and gardening with artistic creations that spark their imagination. More than 40,000 guests have enjoyed this festival to date. And each year, volunteers contribute an average of 1,000 festival hours. And during the 10-day festival, the garden sells twice as many memberships than the rest of the season. The American Public Gardens Association is pleased to present this year's second Award of Program Excellence to the Bringing Books to Life Festival at the Myriad Botanical Gardens in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma.
Hello, everyone. I'm Richard Duran, Marketing and Communications Manager at the American Public Gardens Association, and I will be your staff representative during this virtual conference session. Before we begin, here are a couple of tips to get the most out of your virtual conference experience. First, if you are experiencing poor video or audio quality, we suggest closing other programs on your computer, especially other browser tabs. Your inbox will still be there by the end of the session, I promise. If you have any other problems or questions, association staff are available to help. Give us a call at 610-708-3010 or send us an email at info@publicgardens.org. Second, while this session has been pre-recorded, the presenters are here with us today as panelists and will be happy to take questions in the live question and answer portions of the session. At some point during this session, the presenters may activate a poll. Poll responses are anonymous, so be sure to let us know how you really feel. Finally, you can submit questions using Zoom's Q&A function that you will find in your Zoom toolbar. Questions can be submitted anonymously. You can also upvote other questions to indicate you would like to hear them answered. We will try to answer as many questions as we can during the live Q&A portion of the session. Some questions may be answered directly through the Q&A feature. Thank you, and enjoy today's session.
Hello, everyone. So welcome. We're going to be talking a little bit about crafting surveys for data that you actually need. This is one of my favorite quotes, and I would even go a step farther to it and say that those that are doing it may not be doing it as effectively as they could be. So before we dive into surveys, we're just going to really quickly introduce ourselves.
Hi there, my name is Gillian Drake. I'm the Director of Education with the Vancouver Botanical Gardens Association. We run education programs at 2 different sites in Vancouver, British Columbia, at Van Dusen Botanical Garden and Bloedel Conservatory.
I'm Chuck Lennox with Lennox Insights, a consultancy based in Seattle, and I work a lot with gardens doing interpretive planning and evaluation.
Hi, I'm Kari Ross Nelson. I'm a Research and Evaluation Associate at Ashton Gardens at Thanksgiving Point. Thanksgiving Point is a farm, garden, and museum complex in Lehi, Utah, about 30 miles south of Salt Lake City.
And I'm Kate Raybuck. I'm the Program Coordinator of Botanical and Garden Education at the Conservation Society of California, Oakland Zoo. So we have a zoo and grounds, and I'm in charge of our plant programming. Before we go into surveys, I just want to make a note that these are the first questions really when you start your evaluation that you should answer. So a lot of people default to saying, I want to just send out a survey, but that's not actually the first step. So once you answer these questions, that helps you kind of understand what you need, what best fits your needs, and then you can decide on that methodology. And when you're deciding on surveys, it's important to consider the pros and cons. So there's a lot of really great pros to surveys. They're anonymous, they're inexpensive, you're gathering information directly from the source, but there's also some cons to that. People aren't always as insightful as we'd like them to be. So you might get some responder bias, you might get some answers that aren't quite what you're looking for. You have to be very careful about leading questions in that. With those surveys, you're collecting a bunch of data, which is great. It's often really easy to analyze. There's lots of templates out there, but sometimes that data that you're getting isn't as helpful as you'd like it to be, and it's not the complete picture because you can't really answer follow-up questions. A note for in-person surveys, you are asking them when the experience is still really fresh, but that does mean that you're interrupting their experience, which can be a bit of a con. There's a lot of really great tools out there for conducting surveys. Really, all you need is a piece of paper and a pencil. Now, of course, just like this conference, we're moving towards digital in our current context. So there's a lot of great digital tools that I have listed here. I currently am using Google Forms quite frequently because it's free, but I'm sometimes frustrated with the lack of customizability. Sometimes both the user experience looking at it as well as how I'm getting the data isn't quite what I want. In the past, when I've used a paid subscription to SurveyMonkey, that has a lot more adaptability. So consider your budget and what you have when deciding kind of some of these tools. Try out some free trials. When you are writing your questions, you can use those templates, but it's really important to keep your survey short and sweet, as simple as possible. A lot of people run into problems because they're asking a bunch of nice to know questions, and that kind of fills up your time allotment for surveys, and you're not really getting that need to know data. So here's a couple really good questions to ask yourself while you're creating questions. And it's not just saying, is this important? It's actually really going in and why is this important? What are we going to do with this data? If they answer this, what are we going to do with that? How does this help us really understand our audience and our goals? And I know I'm going to get a lot of groans with this one, but logic models are your friends. It really helps you set yourselves up for success and what data you need to actually measure that success, both short-term, long-term, medium-term, all those things. So logic models can be tiresome, but they really are your friend, and they can help you organize your thoughts when you're doing evaluation. Now, I say measure success, but I don't mean that you're using the survey as a judgment tool to put a stamp on it, C-, you're done, don't think about it anymore. Really, assessment, evaluation, and surveys are a way to increase the quality of what you're producing, to really maximize your impact, and it is a learning process. So back to your questions, you want to think about analytics as you're writing your questions. Ask one question per question. I know that seems obvious, but I see it a lot where you're actually asking multiple things in a single question. That not only helps you simplify, but it also helps you on the analysis side. And then although open-ended questions can be awesome and you're going to get really good information that you may have not even thought of, you want to limit those because they're really, really hard to analyze. And that's because you're getting kind of two different types of data from your survey. You're getting qualitative responses. Those are kind of the free-form answers, the stories that are really hard to analyze. But the quantitative responses, those are the numbers that you're going to get that are easy to analyze. And you really want both of those when you're doing your surveys. So, but being strategic about which you're getting at that time. Now, before you send out your survey to the masses, you want to test it. So question bias is a thing, making sure that you're not using jargon. If you have the capacity to take a smaller sample size of your audience and just ask them so you can assess your assessment, that's ideal. But even just talking to friends, coworkers, I use my husband as a test subject often with my surveys and actually my presentations as well to make sure that I'm not falling into any of these traps. Because really, evaluation and survey writing is a cyclical process, just as your evaluation is a cyclical process. Even once you send it out, you can still learn from your surveys and reflect and keep going and learning. It's a process of learning, and just remember that. So you send your survey out to the world and you start getting responses back. And you keep getting responses and responses and responses. And it can get really overwhelming getting all of this data back depending on how widely you send out your survey. And this is where those applications like SurveyMonkey can really help you and make the data a little bit more manageable because it analyzes some of that for you. But you can also use Excel. Excel is a really great tool. If you are not comfortable with it, I highly recommend just spending some time playing around, maybe watching some tutorials, because not only does it spit out nice little graphs that you can use quickly and efficiently for your reports with the quantitative data, you can also use it to code qualitative data and turn those results into numbers. Now, when I say code, that sounds like a kind of scary word to use for analyzing data, but it's really just looking at your data, reading through all of it, and starting to notice trends, and then putting those answers into those buckets that you find. And then you are able to change that qualitative responses into quantitative data, and then pull quotes that are representative of that data that you've actually found. And then you can take those quotes, you can take those numbers, take those charts, take those pictures, everything that you have learned, and put them into a report. Now, data is really sexy, and it needs to be sexy for your stakeholders to buy in. And there's a lot of great templates out there and really easy ways to make a report. You don't have to be a graphic designer to get there. This is just a template that I took from Prezi. If you actually read it, it doesn't make any sense, but you can plug in your own data into these things and get your stakeholder buy-in, because people aren't actually driven by numbers. I wish they were, but they're not. They're driven by stories. So you as the evaluator, it is your job to kind of bridge the gap between those numbers, that quantitative data, and that qualitative data, those stories, to really drive your decision making and maximize your impact. Now, before we move on, I just want to take a really brief note on ethics. Ethics can seem a little scary because evaluation that you're doing at your garden does fall under the same category as medical research. So you may need an IRB, but really, if you are being concise, respectful, you're not collecting identifying information, and you're using that data internally, you'll be just fine. You don't need to worry about an IRB. If you want to do something a little bit more intense, report out your data, collect identifying information, you may need to go through an IRB. Keep in mind that a university is a great partner in this, and they often have it and can help you out with some of those ethical issues. But yeah, don't be too scared. It's going to be fine. So before we move on to our case studies, I just want to take some questions about kind of the theory side.
My name is Chuck Lennox, and I'm with Lennox Insights, a consulting practice based out of Seattle, Washington. And in one of our case studies, in this case study, we wanted to talk a little bit about a short evaluation project that I was involved with my last client at U.S. Botanic Garden in Washington, D.C. And basically, we put together a short visitor survey to get a sense of how visitors reacted to certain signs. And the good part about this was the fact that we did this initially before all the signs were changed. We wanted to get a sense of basically use just two exhibits, small areas, to get a sense of how they reacted to the sign, how they satisfied with what they learned from it, and also just did they like the aesthetics of it. It was a team effort. I was off-site, so this is an example of using a consultant. I had been on site several different times, so I knew the area and the space and the garden itself, and knew the staff. We had to bring in an outside data collector because there wasn't staff capacity to do that. And we really tried to follow as much best practices. We developed a short evaluation plan itself. The other factor I think that made us successful is that we really circulated the questions ahead of time. And so let's walk through a little bit about how we, some of the opportunities and some of the challenges that we had with that. So the opportunity is the fact that the garden is open 7 days a week. It's free. So we can get all kinds of people coming in. And as with any particular place, a garden will have a certain type of visitor that comes through. We looked at the logistics in terms of how we would stop people, ask them to fill out a survey and the like. Initially, we were going to use iPads, but the challenge with that is keeping track of several iPads, will they disappear and the like. So instead, the data collector actually took down people's answers to questions because she felt that was the fastest thing to do. And we also had to figure out, was it, in terms of a cross-section of people, weekday, weekend, morning and afternoon, busy periods, quiet periods, and the like. So we try to get as much of a cross-section as possible. And that can be a real challenge that way. We initially wanted a certain sample size, and we had to shrink that down dramatically just because we only had a capacity of staff and a certain amount of time to do this. Overall, it was fairly successful. The report that we created was purely just a PowerPoint, it wasn't a written one. So this was a very quick and dirty, so to speak, survey of visitors that way. One of the things I found quite interesting is that visitors were very well satisfied with these signs, felt they learned something like the aesthetics, and that was very frustrating for the graphics team because they wanted something to work on. They wanted a problem to solve, and yet they were successful from the start. So it was quite interesting in that respect. And now we'll go on to our second case study.
Hi, I'm Jillian Drake. I'm the Director of Education at Van Dusen Botanical Garden with the Vancouver Botanical Gardens Association. And I'm going to be talking today specifically about some things we've been doing with surveys for youth programs. Like many gardens, we run a lot of field trip programs and day camps. We also have a large field trip festival that we run called Pollinator Days every year. And in general, we like to survey everyone we can as much as we can, a lot, which includes our teachers, parents, occasionally program participants as appropriate, volunteers within the programs, and seasonal staff and youth leadership positions. So the reality is there's so much we want to know all the time, isn't there? And we can't get to it all. As educators, we put so much work into developing and running children's programs that we could probably fill 5 pages of surveys. We tend to want to know about the activities we're running, which ones did they like the most or the least and why, which ones were the best combination of fun and learning potential, or how age appropriate were they, how well did they align to provincial or state curriculum. If you send out pre-visit materials, you probably want to hear a little bit about those and the effectiveness of those programs. We also need to assess our volunteer program leaders and our junior and seasonal staff that were working with us. And then when we think about the program as a whole, of course, we want to know the overall quality of their experience, their satisfaction rate, how we can improve, and would they recommend this experience to others. And all of these questions are fantastic. They can generate huge amounts of valuable information and data to help you improve your programs and help you to inform the development of new programs. But in addition to these, we really need to think about questions that really aim to get to the heart of why your programs matter. Questions that really answer the question, what impact does your programming have on participants? Does this experience make a difference? Is it possible that a field trip or a summer camp, a week at summer camp, can inspire long-term behavioral change? And as children's programs are a core component of most botanical garden education objectives and organizational mission and vision, we as a whole, we feel pretty strongly that these programs are essential services to our community. So how do we measure that and be able to communicate the impact of our programs? So I feel the best way is get that directly from your participants. And this is one of those areas that those open-ended questions are really valuable within the survey. And these words coming directly from your participants, as Kate said, people are driven by stories. This is what's going to trigger that emotional response to the good work that you're doing. This is the great stuff to share with your board, your executive directors, your donors. Remember, donors give first from the heart and then from the head. So you combine this information with that great quantitative data, and then you've got a really powerful story to really cover the depth and breadth of your impact and what your organization is doing. Just wanted to bring a couple of documents to your attention if you're not familiar with them. BGCI, Botanic Gardens Conservation International, they did a couple of technical reviews, sorry. The first one in 2017, that went out and they got participation from over 200 gardens in 50 countries, really looking at how do they as a garden measure performance and success. And essentially what came out of that, a line from it says that the technical review of 2017 revealed a gap in best practice by botanic gardens, the need to measure impact rather than activity. So then they set out and created the second review in 2018, really looking at what are the impacts that we as a global body, like what is our value to the community all over. And essentially they came up with the results that we're just not measuring that enough. We need to tell the world why we're important. So I'm going to share a few examples of how we've been trying to incorporate these types of questions into our surveys. But before you're doing that, really sitting back and remembering, who exactly are you evaluating? You're evaluating yourself. You're not evaluating your participants. You're measuring your ability to inspire and motivate youth and how well you are doing. So with an example like this is a group of kids that were in a birding camp. And really, we don't really need to know, can they remember a chickadee from a nuthatch? But maybe there's a lot more value in assessing how excited are they to continue this experience, get out into their local parks and natural areas and continue birding. Pardon me, the other aspect of that is really remembering to frame your question in a way that a parent or a teacher can truthfully answer. So here's a couple of examples of questions, and we're always evaluating our questions and modifying and changing them as we need to. And here, you're going to collect some of that qualitative data, what I call sometimes those quotable nuggets that you can use in your reports, in your annual reports, in your donor and grant reports. There's a couple of questions there, one for a parent from a summer camper, another one that we would ask a teacher as a result of their field trip. The third question, how might today's program impact your future actions? This is one of those rare situations where we can directly ask the participants in the program. We were piloting a new field trip called Strategizing Sustainability for high school students. And with advanced permission from the teachers and it being anonymous, we were able to get some immediate feedback from these high school students, both on the impact of what the program is and how we might modify it and change it. Other times working with camp kids, we might just make it quick and easy and list the activities on a board, and they just do the old dot format, and you can get the kids right away putting dots on the activities that they preferred. So you have a quick assessment from their perspective. We also make sure to get feedback from our volunteers and our junior staff, and not only to improve our programming and our experience for them, but we can use this information in terms of how do we recruit new volunteers into these roles? How can we seek salary support for these youth leadership positions? And we've been successful with both of those things using some of the words from the participants. So in this case, these are framed as open-ended questions, which means that you're using the data for those quotes in that case. But there are ways you could actually turn them around if you wanted to, into a little bit more of a standardized question. So for example, maybe you have a question where they can rank how much they agree or disagree with statements such as, after a field trip to Van Dusen Botanical Garden, my students are more likely to stop and smell the flowers, or whatever you want to ask them. I feel it's slightly manipulative, but I think it's an easier way to standardize some of that. Another area we've asked some of these questions is when we're really trying to justify the need for our programs with grants. We started a new program called Connecting Urban Youth to Nature, and we really needed to capture some of the information about why is this program relevant. And by asking questions that we knew the teachers could answer, from how often do they think their students would visit, or what might prevent them. We're not asking them to say what a student is thinking. We're not asking them to give information about the households as a whole, but we were able to use this information to then tell our funders, we value this, our community needs this, and we're able to get funding beyond that first pilot year of that program and keep bringing these youth to the garden. I just want to finish up with an example of a way that you can actually start collecting some data that's not in a survey form. So students that participate in a field trip at Van Dusen all receive a family pass so that they can visit the garden for free with their families. And just a few things for them to fill out on that pass before they can redeem it allows us to generate a lot of information about, does the field trip actually inspire a visit to the garden in the future? Will they come back with their families? And it's a very inexpensive gift to the community that you can give, and with very positive results and PR from that. So, thank you.
Hi, my name is Kari Ross Nelson. I'm the Research and Evaluation Associate at Ashton Gardens, which is at Thanksgiving Point in Lehi, Utah. Like Gillian at Ashton Gardens, we use surveys to evaluate specific programs and events. And like Chuck's example, we also use surveys to evaluate signage and specific garden elements. But what I wanted to share with you today is our monthly exit survey, which helps us keep our finger on the pulse of the visitor experience. So this is how we do it. Generally, we have paper invitations at the admissions desk 1 week of each month. And guest services staff invite visitors to leave their email addresses. And when they have downtime, they put those email addresses into a shared spreadsheet. At the end of the week, I upload those email addresses into Qualtrics and send out the survey. In the current situation, we started out with QR codes posted around the garden. But people, like in the middle of their visit, didn't want to stop and take the survey. We only had a few responses literally in a week. So we realized that, hey, we're doing time ticketing to control the number of visitors at any given time. Visitors are purchasing tickets online. So we're able to glean those email addresses from the ticket purchasing system and distribute the survey that way. One thing to note is that this is going to be a self-selected sample that may not be representative of your general visitorship, but if you accumulate over time a large enough response set, you'll get pretty close to that. Either way, our survey is incentivized. Each month, everyone who completes the survey is entered into a drawing for a free annual membership, which can also be used as a renewal. And this helps drive up the response rate considerably. We see a 40 to 50% response rate, where the industry standard is around 10 to 15%. So if you have something like that you can offer as an incentive, it'll be really helpful to get more responses. Qualtrics allows the creation of dashboards here, and that's what you kind of see in the middle of the screen, that's this slide. So honestly, I don't do any regular analysis, but managers have access to this dashboard and can see responses in real time. Just a thought about online survey platforms. We really like Qualtrics. It's a local company for us and has a lot of great features. Kate mentioned a few others that are worth looking into. Okay, let's talk for a minute about what we've got on our survey. Some of the things we ask, we start with Net Promoter Score. Even if you've never heard of Net Promoter Score before, you've probably answered it on a survey. It goes something like this. On a scale of 0 to 10, how likely are you to recommend, insert your name, Ashton Gardens to a family or friend, a family member or friend? This works kind of as a proxy for satisfaction, knowing that people often base leisure time decisions on word of mouth and what their friends say about something. So remember, it's a 0 to 10 scale. People who answer 9 or 10 are called promoters. 7 or 8 are passives, and anything below 6, they're called distractors. And so the Net Promoter Score is calculated by subtracting the percentage of detractors from the percentage of promoters. And that score can then be anywhere between positive 100 and a negative 100. So the Net Promoter Score is really useful for helping to understand where you stand with your visitors. A Net Promoter Score gives you a number, but to understand the why behind that number, we found that it's really useful to follow up with the question, please explain why you gave that rating. Using the Net Promoter Score with please explain follow-up is a good example of the quantitative versus qualitative data that Kate talked about. The score itself is a number, it's quantitative, while the responses people give are qualitative. They dig a little bit deeper and add meaning to the numbers. And like Kate also mentioned, open-ended responses take more time to analyze, so limit how many you use, but they do provide great insights that numbers alone don't provide. Qualtrics dashboard can scroll through the open-ended responses, kind of has a response ticker feature. But occasionally when we have specific questions, like what are people saying about docents or crowd levels, I'll go through and comb through those responses to see if there's any mention of things like that. Generally, our Net Promoter Score is pretty good, but I can imagine if it suddenly dropped, we would want to look a lot more closely at those responses. Another thing that we use on our surveys is folks' visitor identities. This information helps us understand what motivates our visitors to come and what they value in a visit. John Falk is a leading researcher in informal learning, and over decades of taking a kind of anthropological approach to studying visitors in museums, gardens, zoos, and places like that. He noticed some patterns and defined a handful of visitor identities to help us understand visitors' motivations for coming. For example, a facilitator's goal for coming is to facilitate a positive experience for someone else, like a social visit with a friend or a nature experience for their child. Professionals or hobbyists already knows a lot about plants and may just be coming to confirm that existing knowledge or to learn more specifically about something you have in your gardens, like a historic tulip collection. So you can probably guess how we use this kind of information, translating it into visitor services. Cafes or other spaces to sit and visit, or kid-friendly spaces are great for facilitators. Ways to access special collections and information beyond general signage is something for a professional or hobbyist. So this kind of information is called psychographic data. You can see the image there on the left tells you a little bit about that. It's sort of the flip side of demographic data, which is numbers based. And that is, from that, you're just gonna learn ages, zip codes, education levels, and so on. But when you have this kind of information, we found that understanding visitor identities carries a lot more meaning and adds a lot of depth to our data. Quickly, a couple other things we've got on our monthly exit survey are satisfaction, levels of agreement. How is the educational quality and value of your visit? How are the cleanliness of the gardens, the restroom, things like that, the helpfulness of the staff. Currently we're asking how comfortable are you with the crowd levels during your visit. Something that I always like to end surveys with is the question, anything else you want to tell us? There may be something totally unrelated to the other questions you've asked in your survey, but the visitor really wants to get it off their chest and tell you. And having just kind of an open-ended question, anything else you want to tell us, gives them the opportunity to do that. We only had a little bit of time to talk about writing good survey questions, but phrasing your questions is so important. The online surveys sites that we mentioned before often have guidance on that, so you can simply Google like how to write good survey questions and you'll find that. But up in the right-hand corner is a book that I really like. It's Mildred Patton's Questionnaire Research, and it's geared towards undergraduate research, but I found it really helpful with the visitor studies that I do at our facilities. Okay, we're going to move on to our next slide here and talk about some ways that we've used our data. Here's a couple examples. Our garden managers wanted to better understand the visitor experience to gain insights on potential improvements. That's a pretty broad question. So I pulled survey data from the last couple of years. We looked at our net promoter scores and other things like that. And here's a couple of examples of what we saw. So remember John Falk's visitor identities that we talked about. We might stereotype garden visitors as what he calls rechargers, people looking for an escape from a stressful world. You can see in this table on the left that we have a lot of rechargers to Ashton Gardens, but we also have a lot of parents and grandparents facilitating visits with children. This tells you that we want to have opportunities for solitude and quiet in our garden, but also opportunities for multi-generational interactions. Those two things might need to be at opposite ends of the gardens, but they'll be valuable to our visitors. Up in the top right-hand corner, you'll see how I also filtered net promoter scores by visitor identity. So you can see that we're already doing pretty well with the two groups I just mentioned, the rechargers and the facilitators, but those professional hobbyists, that's our lowest score, so not so much for them. So while they're our smallest segment of visitors, they can be really influential, so we want to make sure that we have offerings for them as well. Okay, that's kind of a quantitative example. Let's look at a qualitative example. This is looking at responses from that anything else question, and there were hundreds of them. So I sorted into those I started sorting into those buckets Kate talked about. There's a bucket for general compliments, a bucket for the admissions price, bucket for people who talked about events and programs. Then there's this one bucket that maybe only the bottom of it was covered, but it was still an important theme. Here are some of the responses to it. I'll let you read over those, but the first one is that at one point as I was walking down the sidewalks, the workers didn't even move to the side to let me pass, and they were blocking the whole path. The next one, kind of the same experience, basically making the experience less than what I've come to love. And then this last one, oh, a couple of workers were actually rude. You can see what she said there about how they didn't expect her to speak their language. This reminds us that our landscaping and horticulture teams are also part of our visitor experience. I mean, it would be impossible to do everything that needs to be done just before and after visitors are in the garden. So that was kind of an eye-opener to us. In the interest of time, I'll let you think about how you might handle a situation like this. This data is a little bit hard to swallow and not totally complimentary, but it's definitely something that you want to know.
All right, so thank you so much. We're going to just really quickly, as evaluators, wrap up by sending you a really quick survey. So just keep in mind, this is anonymous. It's really to help us understand how we can meet your needs, and we really, really appreciate your feedback and taking the time. As you finish filling that out, it should just kind of pop up. We're going to go ahead and open it up to some questions, as well as if you want to contact us later because you think of something, let us know. Thank you. All right. Can everybody hear me okay? Looks like we're good. All right, so we've got a couple questions that have come up. I've answered some of them via text, but if you have more questions, please submit them through the Q&A and we will do our best to get to them. A common theme that was asked pretty early on was if anyone has any recommendations for external IRBs that are not associated with a university. Kari, I saw that you had one that you put up, but I wanted to open it up to Jillian, Chuck, or Kari if you had any others of accessible IRBs.
Well, I guess what I would say is that in some cases you may not need one. It's a situation where, especially if you're working for bigger institutions, usually government agencies, but if it's a private garden, the key to that it would be to clear it through a director, and maybe they go to a board committee or something like that. But in some cases you may not need it.
And I haven't any examples to add to that. We've been working with the university when needed.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is dependent on how you're going to use the information. Like Kate said at the beginning of the presentation, if you're using it for internal improvement and not collecting any identifying information, you're good to go without the IRB. If it's something that you're going to share out broadly, or if you're performing some sort of experiment or quasi-experimental method, which a basic survey is not that, then you're going to need the IRB. But a basic survey that you're gathering the information for internal improvement use, you're okay. Just be careful there. And I think that was a great suggestion from Chuck to run it by a director who might also run it by your board.
Excellent. So let's see, we've got another one here. Do you have any insights on how to best analyze and report on open-ended responses in survey data? So I mentioned this a little bit about coding survey responses. I always read through all of my open-ended responses, see if there are any themes or trends or anything I can pick up on. Kari mentioned, kind of seeing general compliments as one potential survey, kind of bucket and then need to be improved. If you're looking for something specific out of your survey, you may want to also keep that in mind when you're thinking about your buckets. Some of the digital survey programs that we mentioned also kind of naturally go through and do word searches of common words that you might find. So that's another way to kind of try to analyze some of that qualitative data. Does anyone else have anything to add to that one?
You might think about word clouds. They lend themselves well to some questions, but not others. And then it's a good way to visualize and visually represent those open-ended questions. If it's something like, what did you learn? What's one thing you learned from this exhibition? That's a great one to do a word cloud with, because the words that people say the most will come out the biggest in a word cloud. And there's free word cloud generators on the internet. If you've never used one, go ahead and just do a Google search and you'll find it. Some things that don't work out so well is like right now where we're doing some like reopening surveys. What's going to make you feel comfortable, or what are your concerns about visiting when we reopen? And they might say, oh, the virus or masks, but you can't tell which direction they're going. Are they worried about the virus or not worried about the virus? Are they willing to wear masks or not? So, word clouds fit in some situations, but not all, but they are a great way to represent visually that kind of data.
And that reminds me, Kari, I'm going to put in the chat, Know Your Bone, which is, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of it, but if you have not, I would definitely recommend subscribing. And Colleen has actually been doing weekly updates on market research, on people's motivations and likeliness to return given this current crisis that we are in. So definitely check that out if you're looking for more market research. Now, we didn't really talk about this, but market research is looking at the entire market, not just your audience. So it's really helpful in comparing some of those larger, big, sexy data points. As that relates, there was another question of how will you change the way to get data after COVID-19 without personal questionnaire paper? And Kari, I think you talked a little bit about this in yours, but basically going digital. At the zoo, we've sent out a Google Forms. We did a trial pilot of our virtual zoo camp. So we created a Google form. We sent it out digitally. We've had some pretty good response rates because people are they want to connect right now. I'm actually seeing higher response rates. I'll see if Jillian, Chuck, or Kari has something different to add, but higher response rates to my digital surveys than I usually do because people want to chat. They want to share.
I would have to say that because of COVID and not running as many programs, we don't have as much opportunity to do the evaluation at the moment, or up until we've been doing camp again. So can't really answer that one yet.
think the one thing we all should be careful with these days is survey fatigue, because we have the technology available, we can send out a survey to anybody everywhere all the time. But just to kind of monitor that, and maybe what happens in an institution is several different departments may have questions to ask, is to combine them into one, so that members or your target audience is just hearing from one voice that way. Because I know for myself, it's one of those situations, oh, another survey, click, and you delete it.
Yeah, and that does kind of feed into, sorry, Kari, did you have more to add?
I was just going to say that's bad karma, Chuck. You got to take those surveys so people take yours. Sorry.
I did that too. I try to take everyone's survey they send me. It's like, wait, I got to answer this. So I'm a self-selecting group.
Yeah.
Survey karma, yeah.
Which goes to another question that we had of kind of our different roles. And we did some text answers, but I wanted to open it up to Chuck, Jillian, or Kari if they wanted to add anything about kind of what our role is in the institution as related to surveys. And I want to emphasize that anyone can do evaluation. All it takes is one squeaky wheel. And this is the zoo is the second organization that I've been at where I am that squeaky wheel. And it's just at every opportunity that I have, I bring up, oh, do we have data for that? Oh, I'll write a survey. Would you like to send out a survey for that? And obviously be sensitive, as Chuck says, about data or survey fatigue in your visitors. But if you're really starting from zero, just being a little bit squeaky, just being like, oh, well, we could have a graph for that. We could have a chart for that. And then once someone says yes and lets you send out your first survey, write a report and use that sexy data visualization that I talked about. Because as soon as your stakeholders see that, as soon as your board sees that, they're going to go, wait, I want more of that. I want more of those quotes that you use, of that, the church that you used. I want more of that. And I'll put another book that I really like in the chat that is related to kind of presenting some of that data while I let others chime in on that question.
Yeah, I think, Katie, it is important to think about that. Who is your audience for the report, and how will you present that information? Because sometimes some folks really want the numbers, they want the details, and others like those quotes that show that we're making a difference. And so balancing that, I think, is an important aspect of reporting and kind of evaluation.
I wanted to go back for a second on the how we're doing surveys in the current situation. If you want something about the visitor experience right then and there, and you can capture something through time ticketing or email addresses, and that's helpful. But generally, if you're trying to get a feel for if visitors are ready to come back and what they're expecting, and if what you're expecting is going to sit well with them, think about your mailing list and just creating a survey and sending a link to your mailing list, or even posting that link on your social media accounts to get your followers to have those to chime in. That's a good way to collect people's to reach out to people and distribute the survey that way.
Excellent. So we've got about 2 minutes left, so I'm going to try to get one more question in, and that's if surveys are considered anonymous, is it still ethical fair to use direct quotes from the survey for annual reports, etc.? Should that be stated somewhere that quotes may be shared or used?
We do in some of our surveys, we would have that at the top of it so that we may use it.
But you're clarifying that it's still anonymous, right, Jillian?
Yes, it's still anonymous.
Yeah, so clarifying that it's anonymous and making sure that when you are using those quotes, there's no identifying information in those quotes. You'll usually be fine with getting away with it. I have like a boilerplate that I put at the beginning of all my surveys. I don't think we actually included it in the survey that we sent you guys, sorry. But it says that this survey is anonymous. The data will be shared out to stakeholders, but anonymized before it goes out. All right. I think we probably are out of time. How are we doing, Richard?
We are just about out of time. Thanks everybody for being here. It's been a wonderful session, and I think it was very informative for everyone. If you all would like to keep the discussion going, you can click on Live Discussions tab on the conference website and start a topic there. Just a reminder that today's session does qualify for 0.75 CFRE credit hours, and you can get the attendance sheet on the conference website when you go to this specific sessions area. We'd also like to thank our education and communication track sponsor, Lake Flato. Visit www.lakeflato.com, LAKEFLATO, for more information. And to all of our presenters for a great session. Up next at 3:05 Eastern, you'll have the difficult choice between 3 more wonderful concurrent sessions on education, conservation, and the living landscape, followed by our ending session on garden leadership and the student presentations at 4 o'clock Eastern to wrap up the day. Thanks again, everybody, for attending, and we'll see you at the next session.